Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Absolute pleasure to have you join us for this webinar discussion on international relations. If my counting is right, this is webinar 28 under this series that we're having, COVID-19 Opportunity to Thrive, uh, organized by the Center for Advanced Strategic Leadership, CASO. I'm Iguma Gabriel. I'll be your moderator for today. And what a journey it has been from week one. And we are now at the final bend, at least for this series. And I'm very excited that today we discuss international relations. We have all our panelists in, and we are glad that you, the participants, are joining us. I would also like to let you know that we're not only on the Zoom platform, we are on Facebook. And if I could just look to the side for a second, I can see that we have a number of people that are joining us on the Facebook platform. So for those of you that are already logged in, whether it is on Zoom or you are on Facebook, could you just do us a favor and share that video on your on your wall. Host a watch party so that as many people as follow you are able to follow this discussion. Before we go any further, I'd like to invite Mrs. Apofia Muhimbura to start us off with the word of prayer. Apofia, over to you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, and his mercies endure forever. We bless your name, O God, this morning. We enter your gates with thanksgiving. We give thanks to you, O Lord, because of your righteousness. We give you thanks in this assembly. And we enter your courts this morning with praise. We praise your name, O Lord Most High. Among the throngs we praise you, for you are the one who makes peace in our borders. You fill us with the finest of your provisions. We bless your name, for you chose to create this nation and all the other nations. And you made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined our appointed times and the boundaries of our habitation. When you, O Lord Most High, gave the nations their inheritance, when you separated the sons of man, you set our boundaries. You set the boundaries of the peoples, and our boundaries have fallen in pleasant places indeed. We choose to bless you. We choose to bless you because you have given us a beautiful inheritance. We bless you, O Lord, for you give us counsel. We bless you, O Lord, because you are our guide, you are our protector, you are our redeemer, and you are our king above all the kings that we have. We invite you this morning to lead us and to guide us as we discuss international relations, O Lord my God, that whatever we choose to say, whatever we choose to come up with will be to your honor and to your glory. In the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord, we have prayed. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Apofia, for starting us off with In Power. And thank you all for sharing the video, hosting a watch party on your wall. I can see the numbers on Facebook have increased, and I can only attribute it to you, sharing this on your wall so that more people can follow in the discussion. Again, you're very welcome to this webinar organized by the CASO think tank under the series COVID-19 Opportunity to Thrive. We like to say that, yes, COVID-19 may be a dark cloud, but we are choosing to focus on the silver lining that's on the dark cloud. So if you're joining us via social media, Facebook and Twitter, or on the Zoom platform, we are eager to hear from you on this topic of international relations. If you will be posting on social media, please use these two hashtags. This is so that it's easy for us to to locate your comment or your question, and also for our rapporteuring team to follow whatever discussion is going on in relation to this webinar. So the two hashtags are CASO webinar, and the second hashtag is Thrive INT. Thrive INT. We look forward to hearing from you. Another way we'll be able to hear from you, for those of you joining via the Zoom platform, if you could look at the bottom of your screen or wherever it is on your screen that your menus appear, you will see a tab that's labeled Q&A. We will be using that Q&A to hear from you. So for your questions or for your comments, please use the Q&A tab. Our panelists will be frequently visiting that Q&A tab to respond to your questions or to your comments. For Facebook and Twitter, as long as you use the hashtags, comment the way you ordinarily do on those platforms, and we will be able to benefit from your comments and from your questions. We will also use opinion polls. Automatically, an opinion question, an opinion poll question will appear on your screen. I will read that question out as well. Just pick out the option that applies to you. So the one that best describes your view is what you pick out. For the panelists, you are observers, so you won't be able to take the poll. We'll benefit from what the participant's opinion is. I'd like now to invite from the CASO board, CASO being our conveners, I'd like to invite Mr. Newton Baloyi to make some remarks on behalf of CASO. And I'd like to note that this is international, so Newton actually is not in Uganda. Over to you, Mr. Baloyi.
Thank you, Gabriel, and good morning. Greetings from South Africa. And on behalf of the board and management of CASO, under the leadership of our board chairperson, Dr. James Magara, we are honored to welcome this morning our special guest, Mr. Evans Ariabaha, our panelists, Dr. Sebastiano Rengarvo, Dr. Susan Muwanga, Ms. Claire Cheramoi, and of course, our CASO presenter, Mr. Leonard Emanishimwe, and of course, all the participants from our Zoom platforms and Facebook, you're all welcome. This is not our first. We have already gone through 27 weeks consistently of these webinars, and that demonstrates our passion and commitment to the development of Uganda and the African continent. We value as the Center for Advanced Strategic Leadership the role that wisdom, knowledge, and understanding play in national development. It is for this reason that we as CASO have brought together thought leaders, mostly in the beginning of April, who came from the Institute of National Transformation, among others, out of which CASO was born. Together, we developed think pieces in different aspects of Uganda's development. And through these webinars, we bring together leaders from public sector, private sector, academia, and civic society to engage in the development of Uganda post COVID-19. After these sessions, we compile, enhance our thought piece, and we compile them and make them available to leaders and to the public. Today's focus is on international relations. This is yet another important topic, and it is in the heart of the founding fathers of the African Union. It is a very important topic in many fronts. Among them is the fact that through international relations, we are able to create an enabling environment for African unity and for accountability between sovereign nations within the African continent. It is significant also for us as Africans, because given our history, where we've been exposed to slavery, racism, and colonialism, how we relate with other nations matter. We need to relate with other nations as equal partners, relate from a place of strength, a position of strength, and also we have a different dynamic we have, for example, in Uganda, most of our businesses are actually small to medium, but we need an enabling international relations framework that enables our small businesses to be able to thrive in the midst of multinationals in a globalized economy. And this COVID-19 indeed has provided for us a silver lining. We have seen, and it has exposed, of course, some of the challenges, our reliance on nations outside of Uganda, as well as outside of South Africa, outside of Africa in general. We have seen that we can no longer do our trade, 85% of our trade, with nations outside the continent. We need to start trading amongst ourselves. And this has actually been brought to the fore even by our African leaders in the African Union. You may be aware that the African Continental Free Trade Areas has been brought forward and it's up for implementation from the 1st of January 2021. This is something beyond talk, and this is very different from all the other agreements in the past. Already we have got 38 countries that have already signed up for this, of which Uganda is one of them, which is very significant. And to this morning, I would like to welcome all of you as we look at how Uganda should position herself in relation to other nations, both within the continent and also beyond the continent. And on that note, I'll hand over back to our moderator and welcome Mr. Gabriel Iguma and his team, technical team behind the scenes. And thank you very much. All the best. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Newton, for starting us off. And you've made my work a bit complicated because you are a South African, you pronounced the Ugandan names quite well. And now it's going to be problematic when I fail to pronounce the names as well as you did. You will get forgiven. I may not get forgiven, but thank you very much. And thank you all our panelists and participants. Looking forward to having a very fruitful discussion. Now, all our panelists are in. You have had their names. Newton did mention the names, and I'd like us to go straight into our discussion for today. International relations is the study of the relationship of states with each other and with international organizations and certain subnational entities. International relations allows nations to cooperate with one another, pool resources, and share information as a way of facing global issues that go beyond any particular country or region. Contemporary global issues include pandemics, terrorism, and the environment. There are others. Yet, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, governments were very quick to close borders and suspend international flights in a bid to curtail the spread of the virus. Uganda as a nation is part of the East African Community, the African Union, the Commonwealth, the United Nations, among others. But what has been seen during this COVID-19 pandemic has been mostly the weaknesses in these systems and these partnerships. Where we expected the world to be coming together, it seemed like everybody was doing their own thing. Uganda is the host of about 1.3 million refugees. What has this period meant for this, the refugee policy of Uganda? How can Uganda benefit from regional and global changes being witnessed? And how can Uganda benefit from the partnership with other nations? Again, you are welcome to this discussion on international relations. And to start us off, we're going to have Mr. Leonard Imanishimwe. He will be sharing the Council Think Piece. He serves as a secretary to the board of the Uganda Council of Foreign Relations. He's also the executive director of the Uganda Youth Forum and has over 12 years experience in programs that promote abstinence, behavior change of the youth, and fidelity in marriage. He is very passionate about empowering youth to lead productive and transformed lives through life skills training, equipping youth for livelihood improvement, and creating platforms for dialogue and advocacy. He's a fellow of the Ecumen Fund and a facilitator at the Uganda Civil Service College and KIDA Friends of Rwenzori in an advisor and is an advisory to the Global Health Corps. He holds a Master's of International Business Administration, a Bachelor of Arts, Social Sciences, a certificate in Project Planning and Management, and a Leadership Training Certificate from the Ecumen Fund, the Oxide Executive Leadership Training Course certificate by INT that Newton mentioned earlier on, and various postgraduate trainings in public health and youth curriculum development. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver our think piece, please welcome Leonard to our virtual podium. Leonard, over to you. I hope we still have him with us. Leonard, you're muted. You're muted. If you could unmute. You are still muted. Leonard, you're still muted. Okay, let me do this. No, it's okay. Let me do this. There you go. Oh. Could you try it again, Leonard? There you go.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Good morning to all of us online. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the members and to thank Castle Management and Leadership for giving me the opportunity to share the Castle piece on international relations. It's really an opportunity. I am also bringing you greetings from members of the Uganda Council on Foreign Relations. We are a policy think tank that has to be able to promote, and I am happy to see that among the part of Professor Susan Mwanga, I also want to welcome all the other panelists and our special guest. So we are looking at the COVID-19, the opportunity to thrive, and the international relations. First of all, we have all to look at the fact that the pandemic exposed the fragility of international system as it fueled the change in alliances, institutions, and global economy. Governments were very quick to close borders and even suspend international flights in a bid to curtail the spread of the virus. The pandemic has accelerated changes in international relations as nations responded by stepping away from each other rather than taking steps to tackle the crisis together. Borders between African countries were closed, resulting in an unprecedented buildup of cargo transporters at many borders. On the world stage, some nations are increasingly asserting themselves as others retreat from the global scene. Regionally, tensions developed between neighbors as countries pursued different strategies to contain the virus. So, how is this global pandemic changing the nature of international and regional affairs? How can it be used to foster international regional cooperation instead of promoting disintegrative tendencies within the global system as nations seek to disconnect themselves? How can the pandemic be used as an impetus for countries working more closely together instead of an opportunity to gain advantage in the geopolitical competition? How can Uganda benefit from this changing regional and international scene? These are some of the questions that this webinar is addressing. So, we can see that there is just like they are saying, there is a new normal, and we are saying how can we position ourselves and how can we ensure that Uganda is able so not just to become an observer, but is also a participant in the new alignments that have taken place. Now, as a matter of introduction, and I'm happy, Gabriel, you may give a good introduction on international relations. Professor Charles A. Markland defines international relations as the study of relations of states within each other and with international organizations and certain subnational entities in terms of bureaucracies, political parties, interest groups. International relations is also concerned with the relations across boundaries of nations. It addresses international political economy, global governance, intercultural relations, national and ethnic identities, foreign policy analysis, media, social movements, and much more. So as the world around us changes and evolves, so does the conduct of foreign affairs and international relations. We are in a state of constant challenges and opportunities. The institutional framework for conducting international relations and foreign policy implementation has changed. Now more than ever before, foreign policy formulation and implementation is carried out by many actors and stakeholders. So gone are the days when the government will just be the major determinant of foreign policy. There are many actors, and because of that, we need to be able to rule international relations in that context. President Yoweri Museveni, in his State of the Nation address, which was delivered on the 31st of May 2016, placed a strong emphasis on the East African integration. He pointed out that the political and economic integration of East Africa is not just for sentimental reasons, it is in order to ensure our prosperity, the interventions for the prosperity of our people. So therefore, deepening and strengthening regional cooperation has been one of the key focus of Uganda's foreign policy. Now we can look at the history, a brief history of Uganda's international relations. We know, for example, that the earlier contact with the external world in colonial Uganda had to do with the times of the Arab traders and the introduction of Islam and the coming of the long distance trade through when they are looking for slaves and ivory, and then the bringing of guns. We know that Ahmed bin Ibrahim arrived in Uganda and he was able to convince the people to take up Islam, but also with the outside world. Then European explorers and Christian missionaries and the introduction of Christianity. We know stories of the Church Missionary Society and also the White Fathers and how they came into Uganda. We know the stories of the early explorers, John Huntington Speke and all that. All that was Uganda being talked about and also opening up, causing an influx of many other people coming. Then we know the establishment of the British protectorate and the drawing of the Ugandan borders, which some of them were done arbitrarily, of course, which separated communities and tribes, where tribes overlap in one side of the country and then the other also. And sometimes this has caused the tension, cross-border tensions. Then at independence, we know that Uganda joined the British, the Commonwealth, and maintained a close relationship with the colonial master. Britain in the region of East Africa, bringing together Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, was founded in 1967 with the declaration of the Common Man State, however, and the proposed nationalization of the economy in 1967, there was a move toward the socialism. And so the thought of Uganda becoming a socialist state might have forced the international powers, the capital states, to see President Obote as a threat. And then we know that what followed then was a coup. And we know that while initially President Idi Amin was welcome in the Western world, we know that when he declared the economic war and he expelled the Asian, it resulted into a lot of condemnation and isolation of Uganda from the rest of the world. We know that internally within the country, it caused a severe foreign exchange crisis. And we know that when Uganda in 1976 offered sanctuary to the Air France plane, which had been hijacked by the Palestinian terrorists, then Entebbe gave further a very negative picture of Uganda in terms of our reputation, where really our reputation was battered completely, but also we were humiliated when the Israelis, through the Operation Thunderbolt, came here and rescued the hostages. So we know that during this time, Uganda, though, moved towards the Arab countries and became Islamic countries, organization of Islamic countries, and got support from these Arab countries. And then we know that because of that and the tension that the Idi Amin had caused within the region, especially misunderstanding between Uganda and Tanzania, we know that the East African community then collapsed in 1977. Now, when we look at the 1980s to date, we know that the first decade, there was restoration of multi-party democracy through the 1980 national elections, which ended in the contention and the civil war. The NRM captured power in the second half of the decade. Although the NRM was thought to be Marxist movement, then when they captured power, they embarked on implementation of the neoliberal economic policies with strong support from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, but also bilateral relations with the Western countries, particularly the USA and the UK, also were cordial. Then we know that since the period of, we know that in the period of 1996, among other things, we know that 2 US presidents have visited Uganda. We know that we hosted CHOGM. We know that Uganda has participated in peacekeeping missions, and actually we have a successful model of pacifying Somalia, which, as we are all aware, the Americans had withdrawn from. But Uganda has become a model of how providing African solutions to African problems, on how we know the success that AMISOM has had. Then the East African community also has been revived. We know that we've moved closer with the East African passport. Uganda has been also in regional conflicts. We know the 1990-94 war in Rwanda. We know the DRC interventions against the ADF, and then the conflicts in South Sudan. There has also been increased investments in terms of sectors. However, in more China, in terms of our roads are running into Uganda through that. Then also, if we look at the regional and international bodies that Uganda is affiliated to, you know that Uganda has very many regional and international bodies that we belong to. We are members of the East African community. We talk also about the ESC, COMESA, SADC, tripartite arrangements, which are aimed at reducing the overlap and enhancing efficiency, because some members we find, like Tanzania is a member of SADC, but also a member of the East African community. And so there has been those tripartite arrangements to avoid overlap. Then we know about IGAD, the International Intergovernmental Authority on Development, then the International Conference on the Great Lakes region. Then we have the African Union, the Nile Basin Cooperative Framework, the EPAs, the African Caribbean Pacific European Union Agreement on Trade. Then we have the forum, FOCAC, Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. We have the India-Africa Cooperation. We have the TICAD, Tokyo International Conference on African Development, the Afro-Arab Cooperation, and the Commonwealth of Nations, I already said, and the United Nations. So there are really many, and you can see that especially of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, we see now countries like China, India, Japan also coming forward to claim a stake on the African continent, and hence most of these organizations that we see, they also try to compete for a share of the African market. And then we are seeing that Uganda has really participated, is a member and affiliated to many organizations, and we have also signed on many international treaties. Then in terms of the recent regional and international relational trends, we know, for example, that we are now a multipolar world as opposed to the bipolar and the challenge of the superpower notion. Now we know that power can no longer be claimed by one side or two sides like we used to have during the Cold War time. But also we are facing, the world is facing new challenges, like the rise of global terrorism, which is a challenge to the global peace and security. We are seeing many groups that are coming up, the Al-Qaeda, ISIS. We are seeing also Al-Shabaab, the Boko Haram groups. These are challenges that keep on shifting. Sometimes we thought these were international organizations, but we are also seeing the rise of homegrown terrorism, people attacking with knives. We are seeing people, Uganda, of course, had the terrible experience of the bombing. So we've had, this is another challenge that the world must face. Then we're also looking at migration and human trafficking. We all watch with the shock and the sadness when you see young people drowning in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to, or the Gulf of Guinea, trying to move to Europe. So there has been all that. But even internally, we also have some of the Uganda also being used as a trafficking destination for trafficking. Some of our girls also going to the Middle East without clear regulations, and we've seen some of the sad stories of the girls suffering. They were also talking about humanitarian interventions. Now we see that there is now more intervention, even moving away from peacekeeping to peace enforcement, particularly in places where it is thought that probably the civilians are in danger of being killed, where they think genocide may be taking place. And also, this also had its own consequences, like we saw in Libya when they intervened with the bombing of Libya, and we can now see that Libya is now has turned into a failed state with many groups and a lot of people dying. Then also the growth of social media in shaping the international public opinion. Now we know that the governments no longer control media. By the time a minister of information comes to clarify or give a speech, people have already known because of the phones, because of Facebook, because of all these other social media. And this has changed in terms of shaping the international public opinion, but also the reality of the world as a global village, especially for the young people, because now they are sharing, and we start to see now something that we would call like a global culture among the people. But also, there is also a threat to this that now big tech companies are now censoring, choosing what can be seen. So probably Twitter may be able to flag off a certain idea, opinion, or Facebook. So even the whole concept of fact-checking ideas also may be a form of censorship and probably a threat to freedom of expression, whereby things that probably don't like, they may be able to censor them. But it is the new world that we are in, and the social media is changing the way governments operate, the way foreign policy, the way international relations is being conducted. Then we have also challenges of youth food and the growing population, particularly for Uganda and many other countries in Africa. The population is growing, the economies are not growing at the same level, and causing tension within the population, but also in terms of affecting migration. Even for Latin America, we are seeing how people are coming from Mexico, from those Latin American countries, caravans of the youth and the a growing population is a challenge. Then ICT and the global village concept, as I already alluded to that. ICT is also being to change groups, those that are using the ICT, the Amazon, the Alibaba. These are now, it is changing the way trade is being conducted. And now we are moving away from physical markets to virtual markets. And all this is transforming the way business is being conducted around the world. And then, however, of course, there are problems related with that. And we have things like cyber crimes that we didn't have in the past. So now there is hacking. People are receiving information that online violence, all that also. The world is changing, can no longer be conducted, or can no longer be independent policy influencers. Now we have many people. I think one of the things that social media has done is that it has given an opportunity for each person who has an opinion to become, to comment. And somebody was telling me that opinion is the lowest form of knowledge, because even when you are wrong, you still have opinion. So this is what has happened, and it has changed. It has changed the way things work. But we have also seen the climate issues and social development commitment. We are aware that the SDGs require money to end poverty, to promote gender, universal education, and all of that. Yet it is happening at a time when the governments also are struggling. I was telling someone here in Kampala that to use our local, the local speak, that even the government in Azozirajan, they are also crying for help. So you cannot, the Tusaba government, the Tiambe, let the government help us. They also need money, they also have a cash crisis. Yet the world is facing these challenges in terms of social challenges and the climate change challenges. And so we must be able to find solutions for this.
Leonard, I hope you're drawing to a conclusion.
Okay, so now opportunities. Maybe before that we can look at the gaps that were exposed. One, we saw that states were unprepared and the health systems were not ready to deal with the pandemic. So even the systems that we thought were robust, even the countries that we thought were developed countries, and for me, actually, who works with the young people, I am particularly happy, because at some point, you remember in the when the pandemic began, the chances of dying in the US or in Europe were higher than those when you are in Uganda. So the whole thing, also the mindset concept that probably those countries might be better than us. They were exposed by COVID and their robust systems. But also in terms of for our leaders, there was lack of consensus. Even within the East African community, we saw that the problem of truck drivers could not be easily solved. We saw in the European Union, countries were going it alone. Some were enforcing lockdowns, when others are still. But also they couldn't even agree on how to raise funds, for example, in the EU, with the countries like Norway and Germany, a little bit apprehensive about giving money to Italy and Spain. So we saw that leaders also they didn't have consensus on how to tackle this. Then also there were weaknesses within the national health systems who were not prepared. In terms of, we talk of disaster preparedness and all that, but when it came to that, in terms of disaster funds and being able to provide finances, then also we realized actually that over time, the world had become so over-dependent on China for manufacturing. So even when these prime ministers and presidents in the Western world were addressing, they would tell people we are expecting this number of PPEs from China. So it became very clear that the world, some of these countries had moved towards the service sector, and they had left manufacturing to China. That also caused the disruption in the supply chain system, even getting the supplies to the countries. So China now became the storehouse for the whole of the world, and it exposed the fact that probably just depending on one country, it can also be able to hold you hostage. Then challenges that have been posed by COVID. We've seen restriction of global movements and closure of borders, disruption of global supply chains, collapse and grounding of business like airlines, hotels, tourism. We've seen an unbridled competition for supplies, especially testing kits and PPEs, failure to find a common strategy, and lack of coordination on the global stage. So we've seen also that one also put the problem, because the different responses meant that the countries could not come together and be able to find a common solution. So what opportunities can we see from this? We need to develop a rapid response plan of action. Is an opportunity for Uganda, for example, and the rest of East Africa to be able to have a rapid response plan should the crisis of this nature take place, something of this magnitude. Because first of all, now it is no longer a question of if there will be another virus that may be as ferocious as this one, even more ferocious than this one. It's a question of how, of when. Because now the gene is out of the bottle. Even terrorists can acquire the skills and be able to use this. So we need to have a response plan that can be able to address this and prepare ourselves. Whether we have a disaster fund, whether we have all the resources and marshal all the resources to be able that we can be able to do that. But also there's an opportunity for us to do local manufacturing. So that now probably groups like Casita that have been known for importing Chinese products probably can be empowered so that we can have cottage industries to be able to manufacture some of these products that we've been getting from abroad. Because then we have learned that when the borders are closed, when the trucks cannot come in, then we'll have shortages. So better to rely also to make sure that, especially for the essential supplies, that we are able to manufacture them ourselves. There's also an opportunity for research. We know that our scientists did very well, our doctors did very well in the initial. They were able to manage some of the COVID cases, and also the Uganda Virus Research Institute, Makerere University, Murago Hospital, and all that. We are doing a good job, and I think there's an opportunity for us also to conduct research in terms of getting the vaccine, the treatment, the virology of some of these emerging viruses to ensure that we are not out flat-footed or just wait for the other country to be able to develop and for us to be able. Because now, for example, if you look at the vaccines that have been developed, although we are trying to collaborate with like Oxford, but I think even Africa has not had their own. So we'll probably be depending on other countries to provide the vaccine. And then there'll be a question of who is going to pay for the vaccine and all that. I think as a nation and as Africa and East Africa working together, there is a great opportunity that we can be able to harness and work through, leverage all our capabilities to be able to respond properly and even find solutions to some of these challenges. So in terms of conclusion, despite the devastating effect of COVID-19 in terms of loss of human lives and the disruption of livelihoods and the collapse of some sectors of the economy, there is a great opportunity to thrive. We need to respond with the strategies that promote adaptability, that promote resilience, and also coordinated leadership at national, regional, and international level. COVID-19 can provide an opportunity to foster international and regional cooperation instead of promoting disintegrative tendencies within the global system. The pandemic can be used as an impetus for countries working more closely together instead of an opportunity to gain advantage in the political competition. It depends on how the global leaders will respond. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you very much.
Gabriel.
Okay, thank you very much, Leonard, for delivering that think piece. I just like to remind everybody that what we're going to discuss today is actually going to beef this think piece up. So if you think there are any gaps, if you'd like to emphasize anything, just know that what we're going through, this conversation is going to lead to us beefing up this think piece and coming up with a paper that we will share widely as our recommendations. And I'm looking forward to those strategies because in the conclusion, Leonard did mention that we need to come up with strategies that will work for us as a nation, for the region, for the continent. So thank you very much. We're going to go to our first discussant, but before he comes, I'd just like to remind all of us that if you have a question or a comment, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen or wherever your menus are. Q&A is how we'll be hearing from you for now. In a short while, we will give a poll question, but if you're on Facebook or Twitter, please remember to use our two hashtags. That's the hashtags are Castle Webinar and ThriveINT. All right, our first discussant is Dr. Sebastiano Rengarvo. He's a research fellow with the Center for Basic Research. He's also a political scientist and independent consultant in fragility and resilience assessment and political economy analysis. He's also a research fellow with the CBR, and he has research interests in international politics and security, regionalism, civil military relations, post-conflict transformation, democratization, and strategic transformation. He completed the OXEED Executive Leadership course and the History Makers training with the Institute of National Transformation. He is an author. He's the author of the book Security Cooperation in the East African Community. Ladies and gentlemen, let's invite Dr. Rengarvo to the podium. Over to you, Sebastiano.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I thank Castle INT and the Uganda Council on Foreign Relations for once again giving me this opportunity. I'm joining in from upcountry, but now upcountry spaces have also been globalized. I thank my mentor, Leonard, for an impressive presentation. And right away, I would like to pick on from one of the observations he made about the lessons from COVID-19, specifically the failure to come up with a common strategy and coordination at a global level. We know very well that international relations is based on pursuit of interests, national interests, organizational interests, leadership interests. And these interests are pursued for the management and improvement of the self as a country, but also of the others as a community, as an international community in which we live. And we do this through processes of negotiation, conflict, cooperation, and what have you. But the most important issue is that in instances of emergencies like the coronavirus or complex public health emergencies like Ebola, SARS, Marburg, normally organized international institutions become important channels through which states can cooperatively respond to these channels. We saw the experience of the Ebola virus in West Africa, the way the African Union jumped in, ECOWAS jumped in, the Manu River Union jumped in, the World Health Organization jumped in, and something was done to contain the pandemic. But in the case of COVID-19, there has been what I may call sluggishness, because previous to the pandemic, there was some pulling of ropes between the major powers. China, the US were preparing for trade wars. Then COVID-19 breaks out, and people who were no longer at very good trade talking terms find themselves in a situation where they have to manage a complex problem together. But because they were already brewing processes of mistrust and suspicion, the major actors at the global stage were not able to quickly respond jointly to the problem. The advantage for Africa, of course, was that there was this period of observation as the pandemic spread from Asia to Europe to US to northern America, North American sub-region, Africa was able now to observe the characteristics, the behaviors of the virus, the patients, the management practices and experiences. And this helped us to do something within our means to see how we can respond to the pandemic. But while we know that international institutions and organizations are important for managing some of these complex problems, we observed that many of the international organizations actually did not provide sufficient support to professional actors like the World Health Organization to help the world jointly manage the problem. The US was dragging its feet in its support for World Health Organization. China was doing multilateral support arrangements to different countries, and joint efforts almost became fragmented. For instance, while the African Union Center for Disease Control has been providing updates and support, advisory, especially support to countries' national response strategies, there has not been what you would call an African level response strategy at the African Union level. In East Africa, we have a Health Research Commission, an East African Health Research Commission, and other arrangements under the East African Community, but we have not been actually able to design and implement an EAC response strategy. And this shows you that in situations of emergency, unless pre-existing regional and international institutions have been configured for preparedness and for emergencies, it can be difficult for these institutions to quickly patch up their pieces together for collective and common response. But going forward, we can see that the opportunities, as Leonard has mentioned, for research, cooperation in research on vaccination, on cure, as well as on prevention, is a very big opportunity. Cooperation in response strategies, again, the ministers of the East African Community issued a statement, but it didn't progress much as a common response. You saw Uganda is trying a mixture of lockdowns and openings. Tanzania tried an open response strategy. Kenya is a mixture of response and opening. Rwanda is closed and open. In other words, the response of the East African community to the COVID-19 pandemic is inexistent, and possibly in future pandemics, there may be a similar challenge. Cooperation in building resilience. The issue, he talked about the issue of transnational trade as well as regional trade within trading partners. The resilience of global societies to this pandemic will depend on the extent to which mechanisms for facilitating exchange of goods, services, products, and necessities across borders is enabled without threatening the public health of the people. But when trade is disrupted, how do you expect societies to build resilience? How do you expect the most affected sectors like vulnerable groups, the poor, the women, the unemployed, to respond in case situations worsen? So one of the threats of COVID-19, at least initially, was the potential to worsen existing conditions of fragility in many countries around the world. And this is what we are seeing, I think, why countries open up, then they see that the pandemic rising, the infections rising, then they close again, because they are trying to balance their own fragilities with the public health concerns of the pandemic. We have opportunities for cooperation in knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, benchmarking best practices, and more. This is important because, as Leonard has stated clearly, the pandemic has revealed to us that no single society, no single economy, no single social group is a custodian of knowledge of nature, if assuming that COVID-19 is a natural virus. We don't know who is a custodian of knowledge. And therefore, this may be an opportunity for us to accept, to exchange information, share knowledge, as well as learn from one another, regardless of the levels of development at which we may be, as well as the level of technological sophistication we may have constituted or crafted in development of our respective societies. In terms of cushioning regional and international institutions and processes, I think countries need to cooperate to make sure that COVID-19 response strategies and measures do not disrupt regional and international trade channels and opportunities like the Continental Free Trade Area, the East African Community Customs Union and Common Market, the East African Community SADC COMESA tripartite arrangement, because if cushioning is inadequate and for some reason these trade flows reduce, then the global economic crisis can be expected. I wanted to think about the future of COVID-19 in terms of both international relations as well as collective response to possible pandemics. We now observe that given the rate of globalization, global opening up and exchanges, there is not going to be a time when there will be no serious challenges. As he has stated, we may be witnessing more and more pathogens and other microorganisms becoming more virulent, spreading more rapidly, and affecting societies across space. Two, if nation states and international organizations previously had difficulties understanding the importance of convergence of interests, I think now is the time they realized that the interests of me, who is sitting 200 kilometers away from Kampala, are not different from the interests of whoever may be sitting in the heart of New York today, because my public health interests and their public health interests are the same. So it is now time for our international relations practitioners, negotiators, diplomats, lobbyists, to begin to pressure the major actors about the need to identify most convergent interests and pursue those interests. For example, he mentioned the possibility of weaponizing these germs. And it has always been done in biopolitics. We weaponize germs and other public health instruments. But the possibility that someone can pick on a virus like this and run away with it and spread it across space is so high given our travels, given the proliferation of terrorist and other criminal and semi-criminal organizations, but also the levels of misgivings within different domestic political constituencies across the globe. Now, if the rearticulation of national and international interests cannot be done because of the emergence of radical and nationalist leaderships and forms of politics across the globe, we see them in countries like Philippines, we see them in the US and President Trump. These nationalist tendencies may limit the speed with which we may come to certain convergence of interests and pursue common solutions as well as common prevention strategies for forthcoming pandemics. I think that's where we also need to think in terms of looking ahead. The other issue is possibilities of divergence. If interests diverge, then they should diverge on issues that are within the minimum control of human society. I don't know whether it makes sense here. If, for instance, we disagreed on what we should make our national food or our national language, and we are two different countries, and you say, I want to make Ik my national language, and the other one says, no, make English your national official language, we may allow divergence on some of those small issues. But on fundamental as well as humanly indiscriminate problems like pandemics and other complex public health emergencies, I think the need for a rearticulation of the possibility for convergence of interest is ever more important. Okay. Finally, I want to now talk about the practice of international relations in relation to COVID-19. I think the practice needs to change or has to change. One, the major defining characteristics of international political practices which have been pursue my interest, get it, and maybe I can share with you a small bit, a crumb of bread, but as long as I get my interest, I go with it. This has changed. Practitioners need now to make it more emphatic to policymakers and decision makers that there are aspects of international politics that are beyond individual national interests, such as public health, sharing of information on health and emergencies, as well as management of global fragility situations and experiences. Once again, I thank you very much. I hope I will add on as the discussion unfolds.
Yes, Dr. Rengarvo, you will be able to add on as the discussion progresses. Thank you very much for being our first discussant. Before we go to our next discussant, I'd like to invite the technical team to share the opinion poll. Let's have our first poll question. There it is. To what extent do you think foreigners are influencing our national decisions in the post-colonial era? To what extent do you think foreigners are influencing our national decisions in the post-colonial era? Is it to a large extent? Most African countries are still in the pockets of their colonial masters. Second option, to a fair extent. As long as we remain indebted, we cannot experience true independence. Third option, to some extent, no country is free from external influence. And the fourth option is not at all. Independent African countries are determining their own destinies. Please respond accordingly. Pick the option that best expresses your opinion. And to the panelists, you cannot take the poll. You'll only be able, you are an observer, and you can see with me that so far 75% have said to a fair extent, as long as we remain indebted, we cannot experience true independence. Then we have 40% saying to a large extent, most African countries are still in the pockets of their colonial masters. We just have 41% of us that have taken the poll. I will allow maybe 15 more seconds for more people to respond to the poll question. And those of you who are joining us on Twitter, the poll question will also be on Twitter. Please go ahead and respond. But those on Zoom, it's you I'm waiting for to respond before I can end the polling. Okay, I believe we should end it here. Okay, the results are that 60% of us picked option 2, which says to a fair extent, as long as we remain indebted, we cannot experience true independence. And 40% say to a large extent, most African countries are still in the pockets of their colonial masters. No one picked the other 2 options, which are to some extent and not at all. Thank you very much. In about 30 or so minutes, we will have our second poll question. I'd like now to invite our next discussant, who is Dr. Nansozi Mwanga. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Science at Makerere University. She is a senior lecturer in that department, the Department of Political Science, where she is the course leader for refugees and internationally displaced persons in world politics and theory and practice of diplomacy at both undergraduate and graduate level at Makerere University. She is a former head of Department of Political Science and Public Administration, and a Fulbright New Century Scholar. Dr. Mwanga is the acting chair of the Julius Nyerere Leadership Center, a presidential initiative co-hosted by Makerere University and Uganda Management Institute. with extensive multidisciplinary research and consultancy experience in the areas of governance and education policy reform. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Toronto, Canada, a Bachelor of Arts with honors in political science, and a master's degree in the area studies from London University. She also has a postgraduate diploma in international relations and development from the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mwanga. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much for that, that introduction. And thank you very much for the presentation and the think piece, which we're discussing, this morning. I have a couple of comments. First of all, I thank the other panelists for having highlighted a number of issues and problems that exist. But I'd like to take my discussion maybe on a different angle. One of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has done is, of course, to shine a light on the fragility of our institutions, as well as based on what you've just read out, or rather the poll, whether or not we're still indebted and therefore very much beholden to our former colonial masters. Now, what I find and what I get from the presentation as it was made is that the politics seems to have been taken out of the equation. And yet with international relations, beyond national interests and guarding of national interests, the politics of conflict and contestation are so very real within the international system. What the pandemic did is probably shine a light on what we have known to be true in a much more obvious way. And what is that? Basically, that the world is still very much divided between the haves and the have-nots. That is one. Secondly, that much as countries talk about interdependence and reliance on one another and the need to have a closer relationship, first and foremost, states are interested in their national interests. Secondly, in safeguarding their sovereignty, and therefore unable to relinquish that sovereignty to an international body such as World Health Organization, or alternatively, to be able to think in a way that is reliant on a collective identification of a problem, and so on and so forth. Now, that to me would probably spell the crux of the problem as I see it right now. That important as it is, and obvious as it is, that there is a need to find a way in which countries can work together. And I think the think piece did provide some areas and opportunities. I think that maybe we have to think a little bit more strategically, not only as people who are on the African continent, but also as countries that are institutionally fragile, politically fragile, and with, I'm trying to find the politically correct way of saying this, essentially corrupt. There's no other way of sugarcoating that. So with those myriad of issues and problems that faces, I find that we need to think maybe a little bit more about what our policy options are. True, as the previous panelists pointed out, the pandemic has opened up opportunities, and it has made it clear that we, as African countries, have now an opportunity maybe to galvanize our collective brains behind how to grow our businesses to reduce the reliance on foreign direct investment, need to reduce our reliance on imported goods, etc., etc. But we all, this is something that we have known for some time. We did not need the pandemic to tell us that this is what we need. This has been obvious from the start. So what do we do in order to make that a reality, rather than continue to think about it? I mean, you know, if you go back to Nkrumah's time, you know, Africa shall unite, and you know, how many years later, 60 odd years later, we're still looking at how to do it. The first thing that all of the countries in the region and on the African country did was to close their borders. That should tell us something about our ability to put the needs, the broader needs of the region or the continent above our own our own national interests. And I think that we need to interrogate that a little bit more, and research definitely needs to be done as to why that is. Because right now, the solutions that are being offered are based on an assumption that is not real, an assumption that everybody is interested in a collective solution, that everybody is interested in rising above individual state interests. And I would want to see, in terms of some of the recommendations, beyond saying that we need research, I think the research has to be very specific about this issue of the so-called national interest, the issue of sovereignty, and how that has become, to a certain extent, been debilitating in the response to the pandemic itself. So that's one side. The other side that I would like to look at is, of course, beyond the bleak outlook of, you know, what has happened in terms of the pandemic itself, that we look at things such as the response to debt crisis, a way of providing some debt relief. And of course, with the lockdowns across the continents, which have led to an economic downturn and slowdown, it means that there needs to be making an additional targeted debt relief initiatives even more necessary. The second one, and the second policy area, is that if you look at the health spending amongst most African countries, it is below what it should be. And the idea is that there has to be a change in terms of how much is spent on health, in order to be able not only to curtail, but to be able to be in a position to project and be able to be able to project, but be able to also mitigate not only something like the pandemic, but the direct implications of it. Now, although the target is usually a minimum, I think, of 15% of public revenue spending, which is supposed to be allocated to health, the reality that this figure is usually around 7, 8, 9%. And of course, beyond the obvious implications in terms of health spending, there's a need to ensure a sort of adoption of a sort of comprehensive healthcare approach. And I say this not because necessarily of this pandemic, but generally when you look at the healthcare systems and how they work, yes, the care has been democratized, if you want, in a way that, you know, there's all sorts of different service providers in the health sector, but none of them, and the investment that is being made in these health systems does not include, for example, development of vaccines, It does not include building the capacity for, say, local vaccine production. And in a way, this is something that may be in terms of a policy option or a recommendation, that this is the area that should be targeted. Yes, research, but also building the capacity to be able to identify vaccines and be able to develop them and produce them and so on and so forth. And then maybe another area which, I mean, all of us know that wherever you go these days, you have to wash your hands. And the provision of safe water, improved sanitation and hygiene is a basic need in terms of infrastructure. And yet this again is lacking, and maybe could be one of the things that in thinking beyond the pandemic, that maybe more energy and more spending and more investment should be put into this area. Now, the other policy recommendation is, of course, the need to support small and medium businesses, to strengthen the institutions to facilitate transparency, and also to be able to deal with issues of good governance. Because as the pandemic has shown us, there is no longer that ability to be able to rely on Chinese manufactured goods and other goods which are coming from outside. In other words, there is no place to run. And the buck basically stops with individual countries, with our governments, and their ability to be able to not only to facilitate transition to the new norm, but to be able to sustain it. Because as things stand right now, we can try and sanitize the pandemic and talk about it only in terms of the health issue, health provision, health solution. But actually it is a political problem, which has shown us very clearly that as with those of us who study international relations, there is a great divide between those who have and those who don't have. And even within countries, you find that there also remains another divide, again, between those who have and those who don't have. And when it comes to the pandemic pardon?
No, if you could just draw to a conclusion.
Pardon?
Sorry for interrupting you, but we're out of time. So if you could just draw to a conclusion.
Oh, okay. I didn't think I'd finished my 10 minutes yet. I was timing.
Oh, actually, you're in the 13th minute.
Okay, I was gauging myself by the previous speaker who took 20 minutes, but it's okay. Yeah, so I guess so in conclusion, yes, we are aware of the immediate outcomes of the pandemic itself. We are aware of what needs to be done. But I think that we, as researchers and as a think tank, I think the recommendations need to be a bit more targeted and more specific for policymakers to be able to have that uptake. Otherwise, it will remain in a conversation form as opposed to giving them direction as what needs to be done. If that's the conclusion.
All right, thank you very much, Doctor. And we will be coming back to you. You brought up that issue of health spending. I believe there's quite a bit to dig up there. But yes, can we have our next poll question as we prepare to go to have our third and final discussant? All right, our second poll question is, what do you consider to be the greatest benefit of regional integration? What do you consider to be the greatest benefit of regional integration? Is it one, economic, a wider market for the combined population of 180 million people? And then I see B, services potential. Second, I believe that should have been the second option, services, potential for shared common services like travel and education. Third, security, shared responsibility for common external threats. And then the final option, stability, reduced likelihood of internal conflicts destabilizing member states. So the four options are: one, economic; second, services; third, security; and fourth, stability. At the moment, 100% have picked option one, which is economic, a wider market for the combined population of 180 million people. That option should end there. Please ignore the part that says B, services potential. That was option two. Okay, I'm happy to announce that we have more people taking this poll than the ones that took the first one. We still have a majority of us, that's 83%, thinking the economic, benefit is the biggest. All right, let's end the poll. Let's end the polling here. So majority of us, that's 83%, have gone with the option of economic. Then 17% say services, and we have no one picking security and stability. Interesting. Well, it's now time for us to go to our third and final discussant, Ms. Cheromoy Claire. She is a PhD fellow at the Department of History at the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Makerere University. Her professional and research work over the years has focused on problems undermining the development of poor economies, with a particular interest in social justice, governance, inequality, and corruption. Her research related to development and corruption include understanding the effect of information on corruption, consequences on corrupt behavior, gender and corruption. Does corruption grease and sand the wheels of farm efficiency? And interrogating political corruption from a historical perspective in Uganda. She holds a master's degree from Erasmus University, International Institute of Social Studies, Hague in the Netherlands, and majored in human rights development and social justice. She holds a master's in anti-corruption studies from International Anti-Corruption Academy in Luxembourg, Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Cheromoy Claire. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. I would like to thank also the distinguished panelists, especially Dr. Rengarvo, Sebastian, who happens to be my mentor. I'm very grateful to be part of this panel with you. I would like to take this great opportunity and pleasure to thank first of all the Council for giving me this opportunity to have or to provide discussion remarks at this webinar on COVID-19, Opportunity to Thrive for International Relations. I agree with the presenters and fellow panelists that the pandemic has provided both the positive and the negative effects on the global economy. Given the many challenges like developing countries are facing, for example, like Uganda, you'll find that we have faced the pandemic, but it has met us at a point where we have also inherent problems already. The political, economic, and social challenges of the many developing countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, means that we need each other more than ever to see that how do we really make strategies so that we can fight this pandemic together so that we are able to bounce back from these consequences and the aftermath of the pandemic. For instance, if you look at our health sector, like already one doctor has already mentioned, it depicts the gloomy state of the health sector in Uganda. For example, the statistics show that government health expenditure in low and middle income countries amount only to 3% of the gross domestic product. And in this group of the least developed countries, you'll find that just 1% against the 10% in high income countries. For example, if you look at the European countries, there are 4 physicians per 1,000 persons or people. However, in the low income and middle income countries, it is 1%, 1 physician per 100 people. And this poses a huge challenge to our health and showing the capacity gaps that we have in the health sector. Therefore, you'll find that as the presenter has mentioned, that corona pandemic has already exposed the fragility of the international system, and it has fueled changes in the alliance and institutions at the global stage, and also accelerated changes in the international relations and how countries have responded through carving in themselves and responding to their own challenges within their country specific. This has a very huge implication when it comes to international cooperation and development. Historically, for decades, you'll find that the international development cooperation was mainly viewed from the context of the North-South relation. For example, where we see many developing countries of the South, including Uganda, depended more of the North, the rich and industrialized countries. For example, in finances, in economic and technical development assistance, on the account that the North possessed the technical and the financial assistance in this case. But the status quo has challenged us through this pandemic. We find that the rich and the industrialized countries have suffered so much, and therefore many will not continue to support us the same way they had done previously. So the usual massive international support from the North will not come in as usual due to the as it used to be because of the isolated pandemics. For example, you'll find that if you, I think 2017, where we have had different pandemics, for example, flooding, Ebola, droughts, and isolated pandemics, you'll find that countries would come in to really offer that support. But on that note, due to this global pandemic, which is ravaging all sectors and all countries, most countries are coiling into themselves. For example, if you look at the United Nations conference paper on trade and development, they argue that while developed countries are providing trillions of dollars in relief, support and bailouts, developing countries are more constrained on the monetary and external payments fronts, making it difficult for many of them to respond to the multiple shocks triggered by the crisis. You find that even with the little resources that we, the developing countries, have mobilized locally and internationally, some developing countries have not been able to use some of these resources rightfully because of corruption and political maladministration. This also raises questions on many developing countries' state, institutional, and agency capacity to respond to pandemics. A case in Kenya, you'll find that the procurement system was so frauded. Even in Uganda here, the food supply, how the whole scenario or the crisis of supplying food happened. So you'll find that it questions on our capability, whether we are able even to handle such issues when we are faced with such pandemic. So in Uganda, you'll find that there is a lot that has been said about the pandemic and the money that has been used. The politicization of the pandemic has also created management problems, both at national and personal levels. Therefore, in the wake of the challenges that we have, I agree with the presenters that we need coordinated response to the COVID-19. And it is common knowledge in this awake that we cannot fight this pandemic only as Ugandans, but we need each other. For example, you may need a neighbor to really assist you or bail you out in case of any challenge. So solidarity is a must that I can advocate for. The numerous impact of the COVID-19 and the anticipated post-COVID-19 effects is clear that no individual country can manage apart from us collectively looking out for research and also harnessing the opportunities that come along with it and creating sustainable means. Therefore, I advocate for South-South cooperation, solidarity in this question of the pandemic. We need to face the prevailing challenges or circumstances of the pandemic. I know that many countries in the South have been supporting each other financially and technically, but it had not come out more clearly. So the South-South cooperation is very important. As we may see, Uganda has really been receptive to the refugees, and also the military sector where we have the AMISOM. So let's have that cooperation that can bring out the best in us, among us, the South-South cooperation. It's a high time that this is pushed to another level for a sustainable recovery in the South. South-South solidarity is needed in the face of the pandemic. And you find that major countries have played out, for example, China, South Korea. They have been doing this cooperation among themselves. That's why we see the rise of the Asian tigers. It just didn't happen like that. But because of the cooperation that they have harnessed over time. So I call upon the developing countries also to harness that cooperation that can facilitate and strengthen the support to see that we handle this pandemic in one way or the other. So we need to strengthen the support, including the many countries in the South. No country should feel alienated. For example, Malawi had elections this year. How did they, really put out strategies that enabled them to successfully, come about and have their elections in a safe and coordinated manner? We need to borrow such ideas. So at the regional level, or the block or regional blocks, we need to come out and clearly iron out how we can have coordinated responses when it comes to such magnitude of crises. For example, you'll find that our regional blocks normally look out for investment, trade, movement of goods and services. But do we really have plans or strategies that we have put in place within these blocks that in case of any shock that we can arise or come out of it and support each other in one way or the other? So regional blocks should be harnessed to deal with the COVID-19 effects and even other future pandemics, because you never know what would happen in the near future. So the pandemic is a wake-up call to strengthen our regional blocks, to open discussions on how we can deal with the common threats of such pandemics, and also having a collective action and effort is the only way we can face such challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire, for that presentation. And well, the South-South solidarity, we would want to hear more on how that would work. But it is now time for us to invite our special guest. But before we hear from our special guest, let's take the third poll. Just a reminder to those on social media, remember to use our hashtags. That is CASO webinar and ThriveINT. When you use those two hashtags, it will make it easier for us to find your question or your comment. For those logged in via Zoom, a reminder that the Q&A tab is where you can put your question or your comment. So if you have any question or comment, please just use the Q&A tab and our panelists will respond to your question. So the third poll question is, what do you see as the greatest threat to regional integration in Africa? What do you see as the greatest threat to regional integration in Africa? Is it a lack of consensus among member states on the need for increased collaboration? Or is it strong egos of leaders who would rather remain big fish in small ponds instead of becoming smaller fish in a big pond? Or is it communication and infrastructure challenges that make integration difficult? Or finally, external interference from powers that do not want integration in Africa? So far, we have a tie, 50-50 for the first two options. Today, the last two options haven't been popular for any of the poll questions. This one is, what do you see as the greatest threat to regional integration in Africa? Is it one, lack of consensus among member states on the need for increased collaboration? Or two, strong egos of leaders who would rather remain big fish in small ponds instead of becoming smaller fish in a big pond? Or is it C, communication and infrastructure challenges that make integration difficult? Or finally, external interference from powers that do not want integration in Africa? We still have a very low number that has taken the poll, so I would allow maybe 20 more seconds as we prepare to hear from our chief guest for our webinar today. Thank you. We have many more people now taking the poll. Excellent. 10 more seconds and then we'll end the poll. Okay, I think we can end it there. The final results, we have 60% saying a lack of consensus among member states on the need for increased collaboration. We have 40% saying egos. Interesting. We have 40% saying strong egos of leaders who would rather remain big fish in small ponds instead of becoming smaller fish in a big pond. Well, thank you very much for taking that poll. We'll have one more poll question before the webinar ends. But now it is that time where we invite our special guest for the webinar. And today our special guest is Mr. Aryabaha P. Evans. He's the head of International Political Cooperation Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Uganda. He has previously worked at the African Union, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, the Ugandan Embassy Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and the Uganda Embassy in Beijing, China. He has authored 3 books. These are The Role of Beijing Olympics in China's Public Diplomacy and Its Impact on Its Politics, Economics, and Environment. This was in a 2011 book. Then Staff Training, Resource Advocacy, and Job Performance, a Case of the Foreign Service of Uganda. This was in 2016. And Beijing Olympics and China's Public Diplomacy in 2017. He holds a Master of Arts in Diplomacy, the University of Malta. He has a postgraduate diploma in Public Administration and Management, where he got a first class. This is from UMI. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Social Sciences, Makerere University, and he holds several professional training and postgraduate certificates in conflict prevention and peacemaking. He also in conflict resolution and mediation, global governance and human security, trade policy and security policy, management, to mention but a few. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome to our virtual podium our special guest, Mr. Aryabaha P. Evans. Over to you, sir. Your microphone is still muted.
Hello, Mr. Iguma.
Yes, hello.
Microphone unmuted.
Yes, excellent.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I have the opportunity to be with you for the first time. So I'm not experienced in what you do, but I will try to catch up. I'm happy that you have this discussion linking COVID-19 with international relations and what Uganda can benefit. I thank the presenters for their insightful, incisive, and instructive presentations and discussions. And I would build on what they have said without saying as much, but contextualizing some of what they said on how Uganda may benefit from COVID-19 to bolster, enhance, and foster its international relations. Perhaps I begin from a few challenges, but from two contexts. That one, for all the problems we faced and are still facing under COVID-19, they have a national, a regional, and a global context. And for all the benefits that we can harness, the opportunities that we can identify and move forward, we will have to do it at national, sub-regional, regional, and global levels in order to move forward. And if I may say, what we need as a guide in order to harness benefits that may have been exposed by COVID-19, it will be policy, policy, and policy. Public policy in different directions, in health, in education, in trade, in cooperation, and other aspects. Now, having said that, may I identify a few challenges before I can go to the opportunities as they relate directly to Uganda's international relations and perhaps even other aspects. When COVID-19 broke up and when it was declared a global pandemic on 11th of March 2020, the following happened. The United Nations General Assembly of the 75th year was rescheduled, literally cancelled, because no head of state went to New York. G77 meeting in Uganda, which was supposed to be in April this year, was postponed. CHOGM meeting, which was supposed to be hosted in Kigali, was postponed. COP26 on climate change, which was supposed to be hosted in the UK in November, was postponed. An extraordinary summit of the African Union, which was supposed to be in South Africa, was postponed, and several other meetings. These postponements, these reschedulings and cancellations are a negative cost in terms of international relations, because as individuals meet, as organizations meet, and as they interact, there is capital to be harvested from their interactions in terms of how they impact on each other, how they influence each other, how they shape policy, and how they move forward. Face-to-face meetings have been diminished. They are of a great value to international relations. Examples are abound that in the absence of face-to-face meetings, in the absence of informal interactions, in the absence of, for example, in the context of negotiations, tea breaks, luncheons, garden walks, those are moments that help to break deals and sort out issues that are so sticking that in the formal setup, they are not able to resolve. And yet, what COVID-19 has imposed on us is online and virtual meetings, where if there are aspects that need informal, personal touch, they are very difficult to resolve. There is also a problem of precarious security of virtual platforms, where challenges like intrusions, maybe family members interfering, as we had as we were setting up this morning, or exposing private thoughts or private moments to public scrutiny. Those challenges have happened. We also have had separation of families because of COVID-19, closing of airspace and other aspects like those. So to that extent, those have been costs and many more have been enumerated by others who spoke before. But what opportunities can we harvest, or can we identify and harness from COVID-19? These are many, but they have to be guided by policy, and policy. Public policy at national level, public policy at regional level, and public policy at international level, so that we may benefit and optimize the benefits from COVID-19 opportunities that we can identify. If I may begin with ICT, there has been increased use of ICT in holding meetings, including the one we are having today. And this has not been limited to other areas. They have also extended to international relations. For example, today, the African Continental Free Trade Area meeting is going on by the heads of state using virtual means, something that was possible and thought of before, but which is a reality today. So where we can, we need to continue using some of these tools, IC tools, to conduct diplomacy and international relations. And that would be an opportunity that has been driven home by COVID-19 challenges and limitations. E-commerce, online sales, advertising, buying, exchange of goods has gained impetus, especially during COVID-19. It existed before, but with restricted movements, it became evident that most of the things would have to be sold online where that is applicable. And indeed, in most developed countries, that practice picked up even faster, and it is picking up in our developing countries, including Uganda. But what is required for Uganda to benefit more from, for example, e-commerce, is that we need deliberate policies. Policies that will help to increase connectivity, to increase people's ability to purchase and own computers and laptops and have smartphones and use them for these purposes. That way, we can perhaps help reduce information gap, income gaps, and other gaps that exist. It is observable that with the advent of COVID-19, there has been a pickup in use of IT applications like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, automation, robotics, cloud computing, big data analysis, 3D printing, and others. Those are things that are part of us. If we haven't learned much about them, we need to equip ourselves with more know-how so that we may use them better. Then enhancing peace, security, and prosperity. From the challenges of closing borders, from the challenges of limited supplies, and countries monopolizing certain essential personal protective equipments, it becomes necessary, as it is already evident, that Uganda and other countries increasingly produce what they need, both in health and other aspects. It is also evident that despite COVID, countries can still cooperate in areas of peace and security. And a good example is that only last month, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, held a regional meeting for the Great Lakes region countries that had the participation of Uganda, Angola, and Rwanda. And in the course of their discussion, which was a virtual discussion, they agreed on regional infrastructure, including cross-border roads and helping border communities to carry out their trade better. So to that extent, they were able to use the disadvantage of COVID lockdown to utilize virtual platforms and discuss trade and peace and security. Peace and security, in this regard, they talked about the negative forces that have impacted on peace and stability of the region, including ADF, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS. And these have been operating in DRC, and they discussed mechanisms on how they may tackle them. Perhaps from the context of COVID-19 lockdown and closure of airspace, we had a challenge of separation of families, isolation of diplomatic stations, and the need to repatriate nationals and families from diverse places by different countries. The advantage there in the context of international relations is that where countries cooperated, they fostered their relations. Where they helped each other to repatriate their nationals, including like Ugandans from the Middle East and other places, the relations improved out of those thoughtful gestures. So we can build on those and still go forward. Powering of cross-border businesses amidst the pandemic. As countries crossed borders, most of them, including Uganda, remained mindful that there are certain essential supplies which come in from outside. Uganda being a landlocked country, it was prudent and even imperative that goods continue to flow in from outside, as well as Uganda remains able to sell its goods to the outside world, so that then our capital is not frozen to the point of paralysis. So that was an advantage that was learned, that despite COVID, borders can still remain open in some limited way, if for nothing else, support the movement of especially goods. Then still, despite COVID lockdown and the challenges and limitations posed, the African Continental Free Trade Area is being discussed today for purposes of implementing it with effect from the 1st of January 2021. The other aspect that can be linked to international relations is the global effort to make vaccines to help the world against this COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that in the UK, in the US, in Germany, and to a good extent, even in Uganda and other countries, efforts are being deployed to make vaccines that can work against this pandemic. That is an aspect that can be harnessed, maintained, fostered, even for further research into other aspects of health and other areas of human interest. Then from the context of international relations still, here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and for the Republic of Uganda, we had candidates for placement in various regional and international organizations. And to the extent that we were not able to move physically, it was difficult to carry out campaigns. We had to resort to virtual campaigns, online advocacy, and contact in order to carry out these campaigns. And the benefit we got was that, for example, the International Court of Justice, we had a candidate called Justice Julia Sebutine, who was elected for her second term. That was successful. So we can succeed using virtual platforms to carry out campaigns. African Regional Intellectual Property, ARIPO, we had a candidate and we campaigned virtually, and the Ugandan called Mr. Bemanya Twebaze was elected as their next Director General. That was another success that we harnessed in this period. Then there is something called Inter-Africa Coffee Organization. We had a candidate called Ambassador Solomon Lutega. We carried out virtual campaigns and succeeded in getting him elected amidst competition from other countries. We have also conducted some virtual campaigns. There is something called Advisory Committee on Administrative Budget and Budgetary Questions of the UN. We got another Ugandan called Caroline Narwanga elected to that position, again through virtual campaigns. So that is to say that yes, COVID-19 has posed challenges, but we have still navigated these challenges and scored some successes, some of which we can use as benchmarks for future engagements. Now, as I come closer to conclusion, a few areas have been highlighted in terms of policy and policy interventions. Two things stand out. One, that we need cooperation are the institutions within the country, that is national cooperation, and as institutions belonging to a region, that is regional cooperation, and as organizations and countries belonging to the wider world, and that is at the global level in terms of multilateral cooperation. If we enhance multilateral cooperation, then we strengthen the World Health Organization, we strengthen the African Disease Control Center, we strengthen the East African Health Research Commission, and we strengthen our own national institutions like the Virus Research Institute, the Murago Hospital, and other aspects. Also, the use of ICT. We need to be more deliberate than we have been. We need to look at our education sector and come up with how we may vocationalize our education, especially at tertiary and higher education. Vocationalization means that we give more practical skills to our students so that by the time they get out of school, even when they are still in school, they are able to utilize most of these IT tools for the betterment of their lives, for self-employment, for sustenance, and for livelihoods. And finally, this pandemic came. There is a difference between a pandemic and an epidemic. We have had many epidemics. They have limited context in terms of how they affect people. But by the time something is declared as a pandemic, it means it has had a global reach and a global effect. And that is what COVID-19 has been. For purposes of managing epidemics and pandemics, the solution is policy, policy, and policy at the national level, at the regional level, and at the global level. And as we do that, that is when we'll be able to have solidarity, harness our cooperation, have synergies, and support each other. But as a nation, in order to strengthen our position, we need to continue looking at our interests, first and foremost, looking at what we need for self-sufficiency and producing what we need most, with the realization that we may not always go abroad to get what we need. But we can also empower our foreign service, our diplomats, and our negotiators for purposes of helping in norm setting and policy frameworks at regional and international multilateral organizations. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our special guest, Mr. Ariabaha, for your presentation and response to what the other panelists have raised. Before you leave the podium, you've centered your presentation on policy. Could you just share with us how we've done where, where there was already policy? Let's look at the regional and the continental level as East African states, for example, our response, because, there's Tanzania that's doing things its way. We had our issue with truck drivers in relation to Kenya. Continental, in 2001, African states came together and agreed that African states would put at least 15% of their national budgets to health. Earlier presenters told you we're in the region of some 3 to 6. As Uganda, I don't think we've gone beyond 9%. And yet, if we had implemented some of these, probably our health sectors wouldn't be struggling the way they are when we have, a pandemic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for this question. We are a developing country, and we draw lessons from those that have already developed. It became evident in the presentations and discussions that even the United States was struggled, and is struggling. The likes of Italy, UK, Spain, and others are also struggling because something unprecedented happened. So in matters of managing such events that we don't have prior experience about, it will always be work in progress. Work in progress, even at the policy level. But that work in progress, and given the figures you have given, in economics, there is a line of perfect equality. It is an aspiration. It is a vision. You always aspire towards the line of perfect equality. The closer you are to the line of perfect equality, the better for the country. Now, in terms of policy, yes, we are still at 3 to 6% in terms of national budgets for health. But maybe there is a time we are at less than 6%. That we have been able to reach 6% is work in progress, work that we need to improve upon. But from that angle, I bring it home to the discussion we are having today that CASO is a think tank. The role of think tanks needs to be enhanced and supported so that it may be able to assist in policy analysis, policy formulation, policy implementation, policy review, and policy adjustments, working together with the governments. Some policies are conceived from the top and implemented without either prior analysis or review, or some policies with defects continue to be implemented without being adjusted. So if there was a prominent role of research and policy development through think tanks like this one, it will be possible to identify where policy is required, where policy is defective, where policy needs review, and where new policy is required. To that extent, we will be able to make progress. But given that resources are always limited, we cannot always achieve 100% of what we need. But once we diagnose a problem, that is part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now that the special guest has highlighted policy as, a central thing here, I'd like to come to each of the panelists on their opinion around the policy issue, but more on your suggestions on which kinds of policies we should be, putting in place to strengthen our international relations and to deal with some of the issues that have been raised on this webinar. I'd like to start with Dr. Sebastiano Rengarvo. I don't see you on my screen, but I hope you are there.
I am there.
Yes, excellent, excellent. If you could go first.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yaba has observation that we have a health budget, which is less than 10% of the national budget, and yet we have a commitment, for instance, so we have promised at the regional level that we would allocate more than 10% of our national budget to health. Is an important issue that think tanks like CASO should concern themselves with, because I do not know whether the health sector is so marginal or so secondary that it should deserve less than 10% of the national budget. not in terms of absolute resources, but in terms of percentage of resource allocation. That is something that, as he suggested, think tanks should be interested in. But I would like to say that in terms of refining policy, we need to consider that the health policy of today's world is not separable from the security policy, from the agricultural policy, from the trade policy, because we now observe that the current and forthcoming health problems are in their natures complex problems that affect the rest of the health policy environment. So if we review and redefine our health policy as a policy intervention, a policy standpoint that feeds into trade, agriculture, international relations, security, I think we will be able to justify the development of certain health priorities, such as he mentioned, domestic health capacity development, in terms of development of at least basic drugs, vaccination, equipment, strengthening of health institutions, so that we may be able to, as he said, be able to survive without having to go outside to look for many of the things that we will need in the health sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rengarvo. I'd like to put the same to Dr. Susan.
Yes. I mean, I think definitely the issue of the health budget is important, and I think in terms of future research and the identification of policy options, I think tank such as Castle should focus mainly on what can be done. I mean, it's not rocket science that Tanzania has managed to redirect its investment in terms of health and education without necessarily looking outside. I think that the opportunity that the pandemic actually offers us is that, as I said before, there's nowhere to run. If you're sick, you're in Uganda. Whether you're a minister, whether you're, an important person or just an ordinary person, there's nowhere to run. Therefore, maybe this will bring out the politics a lot more in terms of holding our politicians and administrators much more accountable, so that the money that is being spent or can be spent to improve the health facilities and health service delivery will actually be put to optimum use. So I think that the focus should be on what can be done with the money that is available, and more importantly, trying to look at our institutions and how these can be strengthened and capacitated, and in other words, trying to also ensure that corruption is not as rife as it has been in the health sector.
All right. You actually have cued in my next question to you. You are the only panelist that has highlighted the issue of corruption. How big an issue is it in relation to our international relations?
I think that if we're trying to connect the two, I think that if we're looking specifically at the issue of COVID and other health-related service delivery issues, it is huge. I know of organizations that have found it impossible to do business in the sector, as well as another sector, which I will not name right now, because of corruption. That it did not make sense to try and contribute to, because ultimately the objectives would not be met. So, in terms of our international relations, and if we really must connect it to that, I think that first and foremost, we must look internally, that we must put our house in order before we strive to try and join houses with other people. in the sense of whether it's regional integration schemes, whether it is international institutions and organizations. First and foremost, let us put our own houses in order. It does not need for the World Health Organization to come and shame us into using the funds that we have optimally. That for one. Secondly, it does not take for our fellow East Africans to point a finger as to who is not doing what where COVID is concerned. I think overall, most people think and believe that the response initially was very good and very quick and on point in terms of the lockdown and so on and so forth. However, in terms of the actual expenditure and what this means in the long term, I think that needs to be interrogated much more thoroughly by think tanks such as this and others that look at what what is available in terms of resources and what gains individuals have as a result of what has been invested.
All right, Doctor, I have just received a text from the technical team telling me that you may want to be leaving soon. So I'd like to put this other question to you, just in case I don't have the opportunity of asking you later. The world is focusing on a vaccine. Now, of course, Uganda also stated we were going through efforts to find a vaccine for COVID-19. And as expected, more developed countries are ahead of us in that. And there's the whole, discussion on how the vaccine issue is going to be, treated. As a country, how do you see, how would you advise we handle the issue of a vaccine? And there are many components of that how it comes to our country and whether we even have the ability to negotiate in relation to that and how it will be rolled out and those kinds of things. Doctor.
Oh, that's a loaded question, eh? It's a bit of a loaded question, but I really liked the way in which our guest or special presenter emphasized the issue on policy. For this particular question, I would emphasize the issue of corruption. How does the vaccine come in? Clearly is going to be an issue. Who is going to be prioritized is going to be an issue. Is that going to be a transparent process? Is it going to be left to particular individuals? What is the process going to be? Finally, the issue of negotiating with the pharmaceuticals. I think generally most developing countries have not been very successful in those negotiations and have always come out holding the short end of the stick, as it were. So it's important that whoever is at the negotiating table is not only uncorrupt, but very clear as to what the government objectives are in bringing in the vaccine, who is going to be prioritized and why, and ultimately what is expected in the final analysis of rolling out the vaccine itself. I think the issue of corruption for me, and I think others who may be listening out there, is that I'm not talking about something that we don't see in the papers every day. And unfortunately, there are a number of sectors that have been hard hit by corruption. And health is one of them. Right. In the past, it has been hard hit by corruption scandals that whether you're talking about Gavi funds, whether you're talking about the AIDS support and so on and so forth, this is not new. But I think in this particular instance, we have to be a little bit more controlled and a little bit more ethical in order to be able to make optimum use of what I'm sure is going to be a very rare and product that will not be readily available to every Ugandan. There has to be transparency as to how it comes in, who accesses it, when and how.
All right. Doctor, just before you leave, today I'm making adjustments because of special circumstances. So I'm going to come back to you in about 3 or so minutes for you to give your final word and way forward. I'd like to go to Mr. Rengarvo. All of us have seen that he's out and therefore he says his battery is running low. So I'd like Dr. Rengarvo to give his final word and way forward. Then we'll hear from Dr. Susan, and then I'll engage our other panelists. Again, I just beg your indulgence. This is not how we usually do it, but those two panelists have, an issue that's affecting their further participation. So Dr. Rengarvo, over to you.
Thank you very much. Once again, I thank the organizers and the presenter and the discussants for this opportunity. I'll have 3 suggestions mainly. COVID-19 has taught us to develop internal capacity as well as collaborative channels and opportunities for cooperative management of pandemics of this nature. So I would like to suggest that we need to strengthen our domestic health capacity as well as our international relations capacity in terms of training our negotiators, training our foreign service workers, the people we recruit, where we train them, so that they can be able to strengthen our capacity to engage different actors globally and regionally on these kinds of practices. The second recommendation is that perhaps think tanks like CASO and other think tanks should now begin to identify certain sectoral priorities at national, regional, and international level that have close links with the public health subsector, and carry out research, in-depth research and investigations to inform policy on how policy innovations and the strategies may be crafted and designed to strengthen and cushion our countries and our regions against health-related fragilities. The final recommendation, perhaps, is that in refining this think piece, attention should also be paid to the challenge of health emergency responses. At the African Union level, we have rapid response units that under the peace and security arrangement. We have similar arrangements at the East African community level, but I think we need to include a component of strengthening rapid response capabilities in terms of response to epidemics and pandemics, in order to inform the crafting of continental and regional structures that may make the continent and the region a bit more prepared in case similar pandemics break out. Because when you look at the previous experiences of Ebola, Marburg, what have you, we seem to be now entering a world of pandemics. And I think preparing this would be an important component of the paper. The other one, the presenter mentioned it, is the, let me call it transition, the potential transition of these virulent germs from their natural states to the human instrumental state. The possibility that a terrorist or some other bad actor may get access to viruses and other germs and use them to threaten human beings or targets. And once they spread out, they become indiscriminate. Again, the think piece needs to look at the possibility that part of the strategies we need to design is the biopolitical component of ensuring that viruses, as we develop science and technology, viruses and other germs do not become part of the package of terrorist groups and similar security organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rengarvo, and thank you for responding to Masanza Mosenero's question that was put in the Q&A. We still have the opportunity to put our questions and our comments in the Q&A section, and we will have our panelists respond to them. Dr. Mwanga, over to you. Your microphone is muted.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. You get to think about the pandemic, but being forced to think about it in a much more structured way is really, really important, not only as a researcher, but of course, as somebody who's interested in international relations. My parting words, as it were, really relate not only to the challenge that the virus presents, but of the challenge it presents to us as researchers. It is not enough for us to look at the challenge in terms of the health challenge, but in terms of the political challenge, the social challenge, and the economic challenge. And in order for this article, which is already good in terms of highlighting various areas, is as I said, to question why is it that it is difficult, even though we recognize the difficulties and we recognize the importance of collaboration, that this has not been very much at the forefront when it comes to the pandemic. As states rush to close their borders, as states have kept almost silent as to what they are doing in response to the pandemic, it suggests to me that there are some sticky political issues and political conflicts of interest that still exist and which can be made part and parcel of the research that has already been done. So, right. Yeah, that for me, that would be my only recommendation, that there is a need to interrogate the politics behind the pandemic and response by neighboring countries within the region.
Thank you very much. We're glad that you joined us for this discussion. And you actually have left questions for the other panelists. In fact, I am going to go to Claire on that issue of corruption, because you even said it 3 times, corruption, corruption, corruption. And, her studies are around that. So thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
I hope we can interact even further when we have the final piece. Yes. All right. Thanks.
Have a good day. Thank you.
All right. Good day. Claire, I hope you're there. Let's see, Claire? Ms. Cheromoy?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. You heard from Doctor on the issue of corruption. And I know, as I introduced you, a lot of your research has been around corruption, the political, how is it put? Political corruption from a historical perspective in Uganda, interrogating that and things around that. From the way it was shared by Doctor, how big of an issue is it in relation to our international relations as a country? And what can be done about it?
As you may know, one thing we ought to know is that corruption is a very big issue. There's no question about that. But we really understanding and appreciating the effects or the corrosive effects that corruption poses is something that is very important, because corruption impedes economic policies, designs, social and politically. So you'll find that policies around corruption should target harnessing those critical areas of people's welfare, health, and technology, But you'll still see that corruption as well as really penetrated through, even in this pandemic where we see ethics and transparency that should be really be putting, it's something that we need to really adhere. So the biases and corruption surrounding policy designs and implementation is something that we need to do away with so that we can have tangible results. So in one way or the other, you'll find that we need to also change how our politics is done. We need to desist from politics that define the way we design, the way we award, the way we implement. And in awarding, I mean, for example, contracts where there are kickbacks, there are extortions along the way, in that those who are meant to implement a service end up doing a shorter job and causing a lot of havoc or effects in our different sectors. So we need to desist from such politics, which defines the way we design, we award and implement policies. We see that the pandemic has overwhelmed us and taken us by surprise, but also corruption is woven within that. So we need to look out, how do we really intervene or create or design policies whereby we look at research in holistic terms, and in that research should inform anti-corruption interventions that really are smart, but holistically tackle the issue at hand. For example, the health sector right now, we're having huge gaps within health sector. You find that doctors, I was reading the other day that doctors are quite overwhelmed. A doctor will not service maybe 100 people per day. It is impossible. So those are already capacity gaps that corruption can create in one way or the other. Because if we can facilitate the human resource, then we shall be bound to see that the services that are offered are of quality, and issues of kickbacks, extortions are something that we may not really see in our society. So for me, I believe policies should target harnessing the critical areas and affairs of people where we see health, education, technology, and these are some of the key things that we need to really look out so that we can minimize or do away with corruption along the way.
All right. There's a question that has come in from social media, and someone asks, how can a small country like Uganda protect itself from being the grass that gets hurt as elephants fight, or even as elephants pretend to love each other, especially in the area of trade? As the giants work out their trade relations, how would Uganda ensure it gets a piece of the pie without getting trampled under and getting submerged? Yes, Claire?
Hello?
Yes, did you hear the question?
My network is trying to play. I can't. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but okay, let's put the question to Leonard. Leonard, did you hear the question?
Yes, Gabriel, I had the question.
Yes, how can
a
country like Uganda, yes, protect itself from being the grass that suffers as elephants fight?
Actually, the challenge that Uganda would have is that we are a small market. So going it alone and negotiating as Uganda, I think we don't have, we don't stand an advantage, we would be at a fair ground. But what is needed is now to negotiate as a East African bloc. Then we are 180 million. So then we can be able, for example, if you take the case of the EPAs, the Economic Partnership Agreement and Union, what they were trying to do was to divide. When they saw that it was difficult to get a consensus through the African Union and the East African community, what they were trying to do is now to divide and negotiate individual countries. And I think some countries, we are being lured into negotiating it alone. But there, then your voice is limited. I think we need to understand that for us to have a strong voice on the negotiating table and to be taken seriously,
Okay.
the process must go through, and that way we can be able to gain a fair share of the cake.
All right, excellent. As we come back to you, could you please draw the curtain behind you so that we're able to focus on your face and not the light that's behind you? We'll do that yes, we're going to come back to you. Thank you, thank you. All right.
Does that help?
Yes, it has. It has helped quite a bit. Thank you very much. I'd like to go to our special guest. Mr. Aryabaha, there are a couple of questions here. Let's begin with this one on somebody asks, COVID came and we rushed to close borders. Is there any reason why as countries we should not have done that and been more interested in working together towards a common solution? Was it the correct thing for us to rush and close our borders? Yes, please go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I just have two comments. One will be on that question about closing borders. But the next one will be, the first comment will be on how Uganda may protect itself, not suffer as the bigger powers fight. Yes, some kind of suffering will still happen, and it always does happen. But the solution to that kind of suffering, so that it doesn't persist and become death, is multilateralism. Multilateralism at sub-regional level, at regional level, and at global level. Those multilateral institutions enhance the voices of the small, marginalized, vulnerable states into some collective voice, so that the policies that are more favorable to them are agreed upon and implemented. So that is one of the best ways, which is why we have ESC, which is why we have AU, which is why we have the UN. From time to time, you may have situations of nationalism and populism and inside looking, like has been the case in some major powers that you may suspect. But then some relief also comes that some of the leaders come with an element of supporting multilateralism and cooperation. We need to harness those, we need to advocate for them, and we need to embrace them. Closing borders. Borders were closed before. Borders were closed during COVID, and borders will be closed in the future when situations of this nature or another threatening nature happen. And there are many considerations. One is lack of harmonized approach on how to solve the problem. Two is looking at the neighbor as likely to be the source of the problem. Three is if it is understood either by experts as one of the measures for controlling the problem. For example, we had the problem of truck drivers. It was quite a challenge until mechanisms were devised that maybe you don't cross the border, but you manage them at the border. But countries which had borders open and welcomed visitors welcomed more of the problem. So if it is recommended as one of the measures to contain the problem, then you may do it as part of the management of the problem. But if it is to curtail the measures, to fail the neighbors, then you have to be careful and to evaluate whether you have more benefits in closing the border than losses. I thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have an interesting analogy From Apofia, she says, we love each other as East Africans. We also tend to hate each other. And this is the analogy. We are like husband and wife who fight each other, but when a third party wants to intervene, the couple turns and attacks together. We see this expressing itself in the East African community, depending on what is at stake. We quarrel with ourselves, but when required, we can stand together. Is our salvation as the East African community to be found in loving each other or hating each other, and each country trying to strengthen its own systems? Like you said in your answer, there were borders that were closed even before the pandemic. Uganda and Rwanda is an interesting one. But yes, sir.
Does that analogy seek for my comment?
Well, so the thing is, the ending part is actually a question, and is the salvation of the East African community to be found in loving each other or hating each other, and each country trying to strengthen its own systems?
I would say that that is human nature. It was like that before, it is like that today, and it will be like that tomorrow. States compete and cooperate. States fight, states reconcile, states cooperate and develop. So within East African community, we have to do some soul searching, especially in the current times, that there are more impediments to our integration than facilitators that are coming up. So what we may need to do is to revisit, for example, the mechanism of decision making, that we always need to have consensus to reach a decision. We may have to revisit that because at some point consensus has become increasingly difficult to attain. Then two, we also need to address our fears and concerns from an empathetic point of view and from discussion and from engagement. Not balkanization, not disengagement. If we discuss our concerns and our fears, we can devise means and ways of resolving them.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, I hope you can hear me. There's a question here. The pandemic has forced nations to become more inward looking rather than outward. Do you think that because of this season, nations, and Uganda in particular, have now learned their lessons and are now more self-reliant?
Some of these challenges would make us understand, first of all, we need to remember or use research evidence. Let's use research evidence from a historical perspective in terms of how do we deal with challenges of such magnitudes. For example, you'll find that Uganda has really handled the epidemics quite
Did we lose Claire?
Yes, it looks like we have lost it.
Okay, all right. So let me just put that question to Leonard. And then we'll take a poll question and then, oh, Claire, you're back?
Yes, she's back.
Okay, your network is terrible. We had stopped hearing you.
Can you hear me?
I think we can now hear you. Yes, now we can. You can go ahead with your submission. Then we'll put the same to Leonard. We'll take a poll question and then draw to a conclusion.
All I can say is that we need policy, just like one presenter presented. Policy, but that policy should be a policy that can be implemented to the latter, and issues of corruption should really be handled by putting forward anti-corruption interventions that look out for serious criminals who sabotage the whole process. So most countries having inward looking for themselves is something of importance, but we need to cooperate. Nobody can handle such a pandemic on their own. We need cooperation, we need transparency on how we can handle such matters. Because at the end of the day, we are all human and we need each other in terms of assistance, cooperation, and the way forward and in the near future. So it's of great importance that we need to come out and then not only look out for ourselves, but also others. So it's something that we need to rethink about.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. Leonard? Okay, if Leonard is not ready, I'd like to ask all the panelists to prepare for their closing word. I'll be coming back to you in about 2 or so minutes. But now let's have our final poll question. And this is our final poll question today. What do you see as the greatest opportunity that has emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic for regional and international affiliations? The question is, what do you see as the greatest opportunity that has emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic for regional and international affiliations? Is it one, the opportunity for countries to collaborate in preparing for future shocks? 2, the opportunity for collaboration in disease management, research, production of PPEs, development of drugs and vaccines. 3, the opportunity for increased regional communication through virtual means. Or D, nothing good has emerged, countries have become more inward looking. We have 50% saying the opportunity for countries to collaborate in preparing for future shocks. We have 25% saying the opportunity for collaboration in disease management, research, production of PPEs, development of drugs and vaccines, and another 25 saying the opportunity for increased regional communication through virtual means. So all of these are options, but what do you see as the greatest opportunity that has emerged out of the COVID-19 pandemic for regional and international affiliations? I'll just give 15 more seconds and then we'll end the poll. Okay, let's end the poll. And I think the final tally is as I had read it, 50% saying the opportunity for countries to collaborate in preparing for future shocks, 25% apiece for opportunities for collaboration in disease management, research, production of PPEs, development of drugs and vaccines, and the opportunity for increased regional communication through virtual means. No one picked the option of nothing good has emerged. Thank you very much. Would now like to come to each of our panelists to have their final word, way forward, as we bring our discussion on international relations to a close. I'd like to begin with Mr. Leonard, who presented our think piece.
Thank you so much. It has been a very enriching discussion, and I think our panelists have given us very useful and practical recommendations that are going to enrich us further. In addition to what they have said, I also want to think that this should be a moment and a wake-up call for Africa and Africans to rethink their survival, because pandemics like COVID pose existential threat. we need to ask ourselves, for example, when the president of Madagascar said they had developed some kind of a herbal something that would be able to treat COVID patients. He was being ridiculed around and all that. When these Western companies and pharmaceuticals come out and say, okay, we have this vaccine that can work 60%, 90%, then we never ask questions. So I think Africa also needs to believe in itself. We need to support our scientists. We need to know that given the experience of HIV/AIDS, Marburg, Ebola, we need to know that really the future also of Africa may lie with our scientists, working together, government supporting our science to come up with the solutions.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to go ahead.
We have been talking about policies, but I think also we need to practice. What we also lack is implementation, because people have said we have the best policies, but we don't implement them. And I think some of the conflicts across the border with the trucks and all that did not even require a serious policy. These were like decisional leadership, decisional things that need to be done, but it took time. And I think for many people ended up being infected because the issue of truck drivers. So yes, we need the policy, but those policies should go beyond paper, that we can be able to implement them. And finally, also, I think we need a disaster fund and our preparedness to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonard. And I know that from the contribution, you're going to beef up the think piece, and we'll have a final product. I'd like now to go to Ms. Cheromoy Claire for her concluding word.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. What we need to really understand is that the COVID-19 is a public health issue, which requires a multi-sectoral intervention and collaboration for that regard. And that calls for us to realign our policies to reflect on the changing times, but also to rethink on the execution of this. We are not short of policies as Uganda, but the implementation is also an issue that we really need to rethink about and implement these policies to the latter. So I thank you for this, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my ideas and the platform, thanks to your organizing team and the council. Keep safe and social distance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation. Please visit the Q&A. There are 3 open questions there. Would like to respond to them before we end. So that goes to all panelists. Now to our special guest, Mr. Evans Ariavaha, your final word.
Thank you, moderator, for the job well done. And I thank the presenters and discussants for the diverse views. Finally, when all is said and done, I will conclude that we need the 3 aspects of national level, regional level, and global level. We need strong regional and international cooperation, strong multilateralism, better use of IC tools, better policy development, policy analysis, policy implementation and review, better health budget, better accountability and transparency, development of the essential industries that we need for survival as a country, self-sufficiency in diverse fields, and more importantly, ability to sustain ourselves to remain alive as a state and as a people. Doing so much within our country, but also cooperating with other countries, because in the era of globalization, what affects a neighbor affects you, and what happens so far away comes home. So as well as building national systems, we equip our negotiators, our diplomats, and our representatives, so that when they represent us in the regional and global forum for negotiations, better policies emerge with integrity and without compromise, since we will be having competent, capable, and trusted people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aryabaha. And thank you to all our panelists, those that are actually, all of them are still logged in. I don't know if they are actually listening, but thank you very much on behalf of the Castle think tank. I'd like now to invite Mr. Newton Baloyi, board member of the Castle Board, to just come and move a vote of thanks as we end our discussion for today. Over to you, Newton.
Thank you, Gabriel. And special thanks to our special guest, Mr. Evans Aryabaha, as well as our panelists, without mentioning you all by name, as well as the Castle presenter, and indeed the team behind the scenes, the participants for all your contributions, as well as our as yourself as the moderator, Gabriel. Thank you very much. So a few things came out of this, which were close to me personally as observations, but I believe it's things we'll take home also as a Castle. It appears that there seems to be understanding that the vision of our founding fathers of the African Union has not yet been realized in terms of the unification of Africa. There are challenges. Some seem to be at personal level, including corruption, and some seem to be in national interests, which of course are necessary for national preservation, but they also seem to provide a challenge for collaboration amongst ourselves as nations. And indeed, as we look at this topic, it's very vast. It covers almost all sectors of society. We did highlight a lot on the social infrastructure space with regards to health and so forth. And of course, there's also the economic infrastructure that's necessary to enable collaboration in a more robust economic sense between nations. So there's a mixed bag of work that we still have to do. We take this back. We thank you for the feedbacks that you gave us on our think piece. You have greatly enhanced our work, and we will indeed compile this and incorporate all the views and the thoughts that we have received today. And I'd like to invite all of us for a closing prayer. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful time that you have given us, for this platform through Castle, to bring together, Lord, thought leaders to deliberate and seek your wisdom on how to develop our nation, Uganda, and indeed the continent of Africa. We know that unity is central in your agenda, and as we deliberate on this aspect of international relations, we thank you for the wisdom that has been shared. We thank you for the grace to compile all this, Lord, into a format that is insightful, that is able to enable inspired action that will bring about results for the nation of Uganda, but also for the regions within the continent and for the continent at large. Father, we thank you, we give you glory. We look forward for growth, for increase, even in Uganda and the nations of Africa. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much.
Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Newton, and thank you all. Just a few things. Yes, Newton, our president, in his new manifesto, 2021 to 2026, actually highlights the issue of, African unity. and that being a focus of his new term if he is to win. But to the rest of us, we have 2 more webinars in this series. Next week, we'll be looking at Vision 2040. So please register to participate in that discussion. And then our final webinar on the 19th will be a wrap up. We've heard there will have been a total of 30, and we'll be wrapping up. So please plan for the next 2 weeks as we conclude this series. Again, thank you all very much for your participation. We look forward to further engagements as we refine the think piece. Your thoughts will be very important. And until next time, I'd like to say goodbye and God bless you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
All right.